Today's study is a gigantic meta-analysis that is based on 335 studies with all in all 26,573 participants. And what the scientists tried to answer was the big question: are leadership trainings effective? And if so, what factors decide whether a leadership training is really effective or not? Fortunately, Lacerenza and colleagues, who were the authors of this meta-analysis, could answer the first question with a clear yes. Because when they averaged the effect sizes over all these 335 studies, they found that the effect sizes for leadership trainings were on average of middle to big size. When it came to learning, so for example, if the participants in one of those studies had to learn communication skills, or if they had to learn a transformational leadership style, or if they had to learn some business stuff like, for example, data analysis or budget controlling or problem solving, when it came to learning measurements, on average, they improved for about 25%. And when it came to transfer, so when it comes to applying what you have learned in the seminar at your actual work, they on average improved for about 28%. And finally, when it came to results, which is probably the most important for most companies, because it's about cutting costs, it's about the profit of a company, it's about the motivation of the workers, it's about absenteeism and turnovers. When it came to results, the average effect was also quite good. It was about 25% improvement. So as a starting point, these results are already quite important, because they could show that it is possible to improve leadership. You don't have to be born to be a leader, but you can still learn to be better at leadership. So to invest into such leadership trainings, I mean, in the US in 2015, companies invested about $1,252 per employee, and most of the money was into leadership training. And of course, it would be a shame if all this money would be lost. So the scientists could show that leadership trainings can be effective, but the big question is, when are they very effective? So what are moderating factors that decide whether a training is really a success or a failure? So they analyzed a lot of factors. For example, if the training is voluntary or involuntary. If you are made to do this training by your boss, or if you are free to participate in this training. And surprisingly, they could show that voluntary trainings are not always better. When it comes to transfer, applying what you've learned, applying, for example, your new communication skills, it could be shown that voluntary trainings indeed are better. But when it came to the results, when it came to, does it bring the company more profit? Did the atmosphere improve? Are workers now more motivated, or are there still so many turnovers? Surprisingly, when it came to these results, voluntary trainings were not better. And the reason probably is that if a training is voluntary, of course, not that many people will take part. Some will say, no, I don't need it. And the less people take part, of course, the less people will improve their abilities. And if you have, for example, less supervisors who improved their communication skills, all in all, the results for the company, of course, will be smaller. And actually, the scientists could find some evidence for this hypothesis, because they could show that for voluntary trainings, on average, there were only 41 trainees, whereas for the involuntary trainings, there were on average 263 trainees. Another factor the scientists took a look at was the way the information were presented. So was there just an information presentation via a PowerPoint presentation, for example, or were the trainees also allowed to practice, which is also very important, or were there also some demonstrations? So for example, some videos in which was shown how to do it or how not to do it. And it could be shown that especially when it came to transfer, when it came to applying all these new skills in your job, demonstration was very important. And especially effective was a combination of information presenting, so you have to be explained why something is done and how it is done, but then it's also very important that you get a demonstration, as I said, and it makes it even more effective if you are also allowed to practice. So a multi-method approach is very effective. And this is something we see in many areas of learning. Also, for example, when it comes, for example, to psychotherapy, especially in the one-session therapy. The one-session therapy for phobias, for example, when it comes to spider phobia, it is very important that the therapist first demonstrates that it is no problem at all to, for example, let a spider walk over his hand. This enables the patient to see with his own eyes that there is nothing to be afraid of. And of course, maybe mirror neurons play a role here as well. If you see somebody else doing something, your brain more easily will accept that this is all possible. And it's probably the same when it comes to leadership trainings. Another important factor the scientists took a look at was whether there were masked sessions. So if the training was all in one day or in one weekend, or whether there were breaks between the sessions. So there were, for example, some days or some weeks in between the training sessions. And surprisingly, because you would expect that from learning theories, when it only came to learning results, masked sessions were equally effective. But when it came to transfer, when it came to applying what you have learned, and when it came to results, spaced leadership trainings, so leadership trainings with breaks in between, led to better results. Also better results yielded leadership trainings with sufficient feedback, leadership trainings that were taking place on site, so within the company, for example, so really in your everyday area and not somewhere else, somewhere in a hotel in 500 kilometers distance. And also very effective were leadership trainings with trainers. So it's more effective if you have somebody who can show you what you have to learn instead of just a self-administered training in which you have to learn everything by your own. And it's probably the same like working out, for example. If you work out on your own, it can be quite frustrating. It is probably a little bit harder than if you have somebody who motivates you and who shows you what kind of exercises really bring you further. And similarly, it could be shown that virtual trainings are not as effective as face-to-face trainings. And the obvious reason probably is that in virtual trainings, when you are sitting at home in front of your computer, it's not that easy, for example, to practice your new skills. And practice is also a very important component of all these trainings. The last result is also quite interesting because the scientists also observed whether the leadership trainings are more effective for leaders of a higher hierarchy level or for leaders of a lower hierarchy level. So is the training more effective for the big boss or more effective for the small boss? And they could show that when it came to transfer, so when it came to applying what you have learned in this seminar, the trainings for the leaders of a lower hierarchy level were indeed more effective. And the reason might be that for those there is more potential to learn, whereas for leaders of a higher hierarchy level, they might have already learned and applied much more than leaders of the lower hierarchy level. But when the scientists took a look at the results, this pattern was no longer observed. So when it comes to the question whether a training really leads to more sales, to more working motivation, more commitment and less turnover, the results for higher and lower level leaders were almost the same. So those are the quite interesting results of the meta-analysis by Lacerenza and colleagues based on 335 studies. with all in all, as I said, 26,573 participants. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Feel free to take a look at the website or at the books, and maybe we will see next time.